that's what they're really doing in Vegas.
Hemmer critiqued my swing once. I want to see the swing. I don't want to see just stills.
I thought it was all about blackjack tables, but apparently it's about golfing. Who knew? All right, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump getting ready for round 3 in Las Vegas with just 3 weeks left until Election Day. Hello, everybody. I'm Jenna Lee.
With most of your voice
Most
today.
of my voice. We're going to see how it goes.
All right. Hope so. Hope it holds out. I'm John Scott. Tomorrow night brings the third and final presidential debate in Las Vegas, moderated by Fox News anchor Chris Wallace. It's the last big event of this campaign as Hillary Clinton advances into states Democrats have not won in decades, and as Donald Trump doubles down on his claims of a rigged election, although there's no evidence that voter fraud is a widespread problem in the United States. Senior national correspondent John Roberts is live in Las Vegas with more. John.
John, good morning to you. No evidence that it's a widespread problem, but evidence, according to the Pew Center and the Washington Post, which Donald Trump has cited, that it is a problem and could affect very close races. And there are a couple of those in this presidential election. You know, wide consensus that tomorrow night here in Las Vegas at the debate is Donald Trump's last chance to turn around falling poll numbers. And what he wants to get is an issue that he can seize upon and take all of this other stuff off the table. And he believes that he may have that in the new revelations that the State Department was negotiating with the FBI, potential quid pro quo, to reclassify some of Hillary Clinton's emails. Donald Trump also saying that Republicans, despite the fact that they're on a congressional recess right now, should bring Congress back and have hearings about this, telling our Carl Cameron last night that he doesn't see why Republicans want to put this off. Listen to this.
I think it's crazy what's going on. It's totally illegal. It's a criminal act. It's a crime. And I hear the Republicans are going to hold hearings after the election. Why would you hold them after the election? You want to hold those hearings before the election. But this is a criminal act, and it's incredible that they can do this and get away with it.
Absolutely no chance, though, that Congress will hold any hearings between now and the election. As I said, they are on recess. What Donald Trump needs to do tomorrow night is get all of these allegations from these women off the table as quickly as possible so that he can turn to policy and attack Hillary Clinton on that. He's got some debate prep today. He's going to try to formulate an answer that gets this off the table. Also yesterday, the campaign putting out Melania Trump for a couple of interviews. Melania Trump telling our Ainsley Earhart that these women who have come forward with these allegations need to air those out in a court of law, not in the media. Also saying that she has accepted her husband's apology for that hot mic moment and that it's time to move on. Listen to what she said.
Those words, they were offensive to me and they were inappropriate. And he apologized to me, and I accept his apology, and we are moving on.
She wants to get past this. She wants voters to get past it as well. And in fact, John, you could probably say that the Donald Trump campaign, cannot survive another controversy in these remaining 21 days. So he's got to keep it on message, 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 policy, policy, policy at tomorrow night's debate. We'll see if he can do it. Debate prep this morning in Colorado Springs, later on tonight here in Las Vegas when he arrives after his rally in Grand Junction, Colorado later on today. He's got one more chance to try to hit it out of the park. John?
We're going to be talking more about the poll numbers in just a moment. John Roberts in Vegas, waiting for the debate. Thank you, John.
One of the other big stories today is WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks continuing its near daily release of Clinton campaign information this morning. The group publishing its 11th batch of John Podesta emails within the last few hours. Ed Henry's live in Washington with the very latest. Ed?
Well, Jenna, good to see you. Hillary Clinton dealing with yet another document dump. You're absolutely right. WikiLeaks saying that they've just put out there what is basically round 11 of John Podesta's personal email. This is obviously the campaign chairman for Hillary Clinton, and never before have we seen a veil lifted off a campaign like this. Look at this email from Mandy Grunwald, an outside advisor to Hillary Clinton, to John Podesta, saying, quote, about preparing for a Benghazi hearing. I don't mind the backs of dead Americans line being used at the hearing because we need a bit of moral outrage. I suppose we can dial the language back, but the sense of outrage should remain. She was trying to coach Hillary Clinton before a big appearance late last year about Benghazi, where she was talking about stirring up this moral outrage. How do you get them fired up? Look at what Hillary Clinton did, for example, at one hearing in 2013.
With all due respect, The fact is, we had 4 dead Americans. Was it because of a protest, or was it because of guys out for a walk one night who decided they'd go kill some Americans? What difference at this point does it make?
So you'll remember that now infamous moment from 2013. What this email in late 2015 was saying was basically, do that again as you face off with the committee. Then, of course, we have an email about Israel that's quite interesting, because in the public domain, Hillary Clinton talking about how she's a great friend of Israel. In private, as the campaign kicked off in 2015, Robbie Mook the campaign manager sent an email to John Podesta about go soft on mentioning Israel in her stump speech. Quote, we shouldn't have Israel mentioned basically at public events, especially Dem activists, meaning a Democratic activist would not like to see her right out of the gate getting behind Israel. Again, this is showing 2 different faces of Hillary Clinton in public now in the general election, talking about being a strong ally of Israel. At the beginning of the campaign in private, they were saying, let's go soft on that. And then one last email just came out a moment ago where John Podesta was calling Bernie Sanders a, quote, doofus. Maybe that's just silly. It's a little bit of gossip, but it could get a little awkward the next time Hillary Clinton has one of those so-called unity events with Bernie Sanders. Now that they've all kissed and made up after those tough primaries, we're getting a window inside what these campaign advisors to Hillary Clinton really think about not just Republicans, but people like Bernie Sanders as well.
Maybe it was just affectionate, right? I mean, is it no, probably not. Ed, thank you very much. An important story for us today.
Feel better.
John?
We begin with this Fox News alert, and our Fox News number crunchers have taken a look at the various states, and there is a big surprise just out. Take a look at the state of Texas. It has not voted Democrat for president since Jimmy Carter was elected back in, 1976? Texas is now being classified as a lean Republican state instead of a solid red Republican state, according to our Fox News team. Also look at Missouri and Iowa. Both of them now leaning Republican, as well as the state of Georgia. They are not solid red anymore. This as Donald Trump's poll numbers continue to drop with just 3 weeks left to go until Election Day, 3 weeks from today. According to the latest CBS News poll, in a 4-way race, Trump now trails Hillary Clinton by 9 points. Just 2 weeks ago, Clinton's lead in that poll was 4 points. Let's talk about the reasons why with John Bussey, associate editor of the Wall Street Journal. Is it all about that tape that came out on that Friday?
Well, I think it was about the first debate. That's where you saw the momentum begin to falter. He had been rising in the polls up until that point, then followed by the comments about Miss Universe, the tape, other kind of email and Twitter blasts that went out that portrayed him as, somebody kind of off message. And that's where the numbers began to change. I mean, this development in Texas is really quite interesting. Georgia and Arizona possibly as well could be in play. They're Republican now. They're leaning Republican. It's possible by Election Day they could be in play.
Okay, so in terms of, we've got another debate coming up this week. Donald Trump still has 3 weeks. Can he turn these numbers around?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you don't see the language that might do that quite yet. And again, 3 weeks, as we've discovered the last 3 weeks, who would have thought 3 weeks ago that you would have had the events transpire that have transpired, that have changed the direction of the polling? He's talking about a rigged election, and he's getting in tangles with the Republican leadership over that issue. They say these elections are not rigged, and they aren't, right? In the United States, we hold elections, and they work. There's always some fritzes here and there, but they work. That language is not going to engender a lot of support among the Republican leadership, as well as those individuals who at this stage of the game are thinking, who do I just trust more? Our poll over this past weekend found people still felt by 4 percentage points Donald Trump to be more straightforward and honest than Hillary Clinton. That's because of the emails issue, among other things. But that can erode.
We have two, shall I say, deeply flawed candidates, at least not well liked by the American public at large.
Correct.
The highest negative ratings of any two candidates ever in the history of polling. But he seems to be taking a greater hit from the revelations of the last couple of weeks. When you compare her emails to what's come out about him, Can you explain that? Why the disparity in the way it's affecting their campaigns?
I think it really was that first debate and people's assessment of him as a presidential timber. Now, you can argue it both ways, and Trump supporters will say it was a great performance. But apparently, those who were still trying to decide felt that it wasn't. Plus, the subsequent controversies that ensued from the first debate.
And that's where you win elections. You don't win it with your party, and frankly, Trump has problems there. According to the latest Fox News poll, he had 84% of Republicans supporting him. In the last week or so, that's dropped to 77%.
Yeah.
But if you win elections in the middle with undecided and independent voters.
Yeah. If you look at his core, though, his core is staunchly behind him,
sure,
as it is with Hillary Clinton. That, if anything, has gotten even more solid for him. That simply, unfortunately for Donald Trump, is not enough to win the election. It's not good that he's fighting with the leadership of the Republican Party either, that Paul Ryan is going out of his way to avoid Donald Trump on the campaign trail. That's problematic for a Trump campaign that is looking to broaden its base into the core traditional Republican landscape. He's having a hard time doing that.
He has been very critical of the campaign that Mitt Romney ran, and in most sectors of the electorate, he's not doing as well as Mitt Romney did with voters.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that you're going to see that kind of play out also in Latino voting this time around as well. You know, even the email issue, that continues to be a drumbeat, a problem for Hillary Clinton. These emails that kind of keep coming out through the WikiLeaks. This FBI one, though, you should read Devlin Barrett's piece in the Wall Street Journal today. It's a bit more ambiguous than the Trump campaign would want it to be. One of those suggestions for a possible quid pro quo actually came from within the FBI, according to an FBI official. So it was a muddled discussion going on. It was clear, though, that the State Department was trying to get the emails at a reduced classification. That's going to remain a controversy and a problem for Hillary Clinton for the rest of the campaign.
We will look for that piece in the Wall Street Journal today. John Bussey. John, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Well, for the first time ever, a Fox News anchor will be moderating a general election presidential debate. You know, we're talking about award-winning journalist Chris Wallace, the best interviewer in the business. He will moderate the events on Wednesday night, that all-important final debate between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. It's a make-or-break debate less than 3 weeks before the historic election of 2016. Tomorrow night in Las Vegas. And, of course, the best place to watch it, Fox News Channel.
Well, on a Tinder date gone horribly wrong, a woman falls to her death from a man's 14th floor balcony. Was it murder? We have details next on that. Also, the country's largest health insurer is reporting major profits after announcing it would drop out of Obamacare. What does that mean for you? We'll break it down next.
Now for a look at some crime stories we're following. Jury selection begins in the 2012 kidnapping and murder of Sierra Lamar in Southern California. Antolin Garcia Torres is accused of kidnapping the teenager from a bus stop and killing her. He could face the death penalty if convicted. Authorities in a Houston suburb are investigating the disappearance of this girl, 15-year-old Alyssa Schaefer. Her mother says she was last seen Monday speaking with a boy near her school. And jurors in the Australian murder trial of Gable Tosti have ended a second day of deliberations without reaching a unanimous verdict. Tosti is accused of murder in the death of a woman he met on the dating site Tinder. Warriana Wright died after falling from the 14th floor balcony of his apartment in August 2014.
Going to turn now to a Fox Business Alert. United Health Group is reporting a big boost in third quarter profits just 6 months after the nation's largest health insurance company announced it was dropping out of Obamacare exchanges in most states at the end of the year. Fox Business Network's Lauren Simonetti joins us live with more. Lauren?
Hey, Jenna. So how is all of this affecting the country's biggest healthcare insurer? Wall Street sending United Health shares up 5% after United Health said its quarterly profits rose 23% to just under $2 billion, and it raised its full-year outlook as a result. How is United Health making money if not from Obamacare? Well, as you mentioned, United said it's bailing on those exchanges because it expected to book $850 million in losses on them this year, meaning that next year it will no longer sell Obamacare plans in nearly all of the 34 states where it currently does business. In the meantime, United Health is benefiting from its Optum unit That includes a pharmacy benefits manager as well as technology services for doctors and hospitals and urgent care. But its decision to ditch the marketplaces is being copied by many of its rivals. That is creating a big problem for Americans seeking health coverage next year. They are very likely to face higher premiums and fewer options. As a result, the White House right now trying to do damage control, pitching ways to get more Americans enrolled as the annual enrollment period for Obamacare coverage begins November 1st. Jenna?
Right before the election. Lauren, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, a record number of people juggling more than one job right now. How the economy is forcing more people to moonlight. And the Clinton campaign seeing an opportunity in some deep red states. We just told you about Texas. They're going to do a big ad buy there. How Democrats are trying to expand the map and what it could mean to the down ballot races. Well, more Americans are juggling more than one job. The number of multiple job holders hit an 8-year high in September, rising by 300,000 last month to 7.8 million, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Many workers are looking for extra income as wages are inching up in this country. Job openings neared an all-time high of 5.8 million in July before dropping a bit to 5.4 million in August. Meantime, the Hillary Clinton campaign is pouring money and resources into some usually red states which could be in play as Democrats hope to expand the map just 3 weeks before Election Day. And the fight for control of the Senate is coming down to 6 states with very close contests. Kostas Panagopoulos is with us, political analyst and director at the Center for Electoral Politics and Democracy at Fordham University. We just told our viewers that Texas, which has been a reliably Republican state since 1980, is still leaning Republican, but it's not solid red anymore. And apparently the Hillary Clinton campaign is going to be buying ads there to try to induce some traditional Republican voters to come her way. Is that going to be effective?
Well, you have two things going on in this election cycle. One is you have Donald Trump, who's affecting the race in very interesting ways. And the other is you have big demographic shifts in places like Texas. The populations are completely changing there with a lot of minorities, especially Latinos, voting in those places, and it could potentially shake up the politics in those states. So it's, even if it's not going to affect this election cycle in a way that could swing Texas to the blue column, it might have advantages for Democrats moving forward in subsequent election cycles in which they may want to compete in places like
Arizona
Texas.
Is another state that has been pretty reliably Republican for a long time, and that's another state that seems to be in play.
Again, very large Latino population there. Another place where the Democrats think there may be fertile ground to do at least better than they were going to do without these resources being poured in there.
All right, what about advertising? I mean, can that make the difference? Donald Trump, it's my understanding, has not spent any money advertising in Arizona.
Well, it can help. It can help because it can get the word out, and it can certainly get people to start thinking about the choices they make. It's unclear whether it actually affects how people vote or mobilizes people, but it can potentially get people to start thinking about who they might vote for.
Are you expecting a high turnout election or a low turnout election? I mean, we've got two candidates, presidential candidates, with huge negatives.
Right, but you do have both bases of the parties highly energized. And what we've seen in recent presidential election cycles is a bit of an uptick in turnout, but not more than about 60% of the electorate in this country that's eligible to vote actually shows up on Election Day. My guess is it'll be slightly lower than in 2008 when we've seen fairly high turnout rates, but that we won't cross the 60% mark in terms of national voter turnout of eligible voters.
So do voters, are they motivated by their disdain for the opposing candidate as much as anything else?
Well, it does seem to be that way in this election cycle, and as I said, you have the bases of the parties very highly energized, but part of it will depend on the ground game, and at the moment there seems to be more of a ground game being organized on the Democratic side than on the Republican side, where there isn't very much of a ground game, as I understand it, going on, at least not in the traditional sense of parties and candidates working to get voters to the polls. Trump seems to be relying more on the media and the press he's attracting to to mobilize people, but there's got to be a vibrant ground game operation to get voters to show up on Election Day.
But the Republican National Committee, for one, has bragged about its ground game and its data operation that it says is going to blow everything the Democrats have ever done out of the water. Is the Trump campaign not taking advantage of that, or are they kind of doing their own thing?
Well, I think the RNC is working very hard to get voters out, and they have, in recent cycles, proven that they know how to do this as much as Democrats know how to do this. In some cases, maybe even better. So it's possible, but you've got to have the national committees working in tandem with the candidates' campaigns. And it's not clear that you actually have that, because in some ways Donald Trump is running a very non-traditional campaign. And this is one of the areas in which his campaign may be relying more so on the media and other approaches rather than grassroots mobilization.
Republicans are desperate to retain control of the Senate. You know, at this point, as we stand, 3 weeks from Election Day, can they do that?
It looks very unlikely. You know, first of all, they have many more seats to defend. They've got 24 seats to defend in the Senate. Democrats have only 10 seats to defend. And on top of that, you have lots of very close races, some of which could decide control. It'll be very close, but the Democrats stand a better than 50% chance of gaining at least 50 seats and maybe even a majority in the Senate.
Kostas Panagopoulos, Fordham University. Thanks for your expertise.
Thank you.
Well, a lot of calls for a kinder, gentler political arena, but they're coming after this polarizing presidential campaign. Will it ever change? Why, one historian says the early years of our democracy might have been even worse. Also, a new Frontline documentary looking at the terror attacks that have rocked Europe recently. Our next guest says the region is not prepared for a threat that's growing.
When an attack happens and you had no prior intelligence, that's one thing. But when you find out that you could have prevented it, that is a tragedy.
Right now, a quick look at what's still to come this hour of Happening Now. New details about the execution-style murder of a Mexican federal judge linked to the notorious drug lord El Chapo. This year's presidential election sparking widespread calls for a less polarized political climate. Why our upcoming guest says our founding fathers might have actually had a worse political climate. And a frightening close call for two California police officers targeted by a gunman while they were sitting at Starbucks. How they were able to walk away unharmed.
Unlike recruits to Al-Qaeda, aspiring ISIS militants often knew little about Islam.
It was open bar. Anyone who wanted to join the Islamic State could do so. It was well known that Al-Qaeda had created filters. You had to show you were trustworthy. There were a series of tests and an apprenticeship. It was not all that easy. In this case, anyone can join. Even crazy people, very violent people, petty criminals.
Well, that's a clip from the new Frontline documentary, Terror in Europe. The film analyzing a series of terror attacks across the continent and coming to the conclusion that Europe is still not prepared to deal with the threat. Let's bring in Sebastian Rotella, a Frontline correspondent, senior reporter at ProPublica. And Sebastian, this is an extremely compelling hour that you put together about a problem that we've talked so much about over the last several years. I'd just like to take things sort of step by step. Let's start first with Belgium. How did Belgium become such an epicenter for terror?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. As far as Belgium, you know, there's been the presence of Islamic extremist networks there going back to the 90s. And it's a small country which has strong privacy laws and well-intentioned, you know, guarantees of individual rights. But the security forces were always underfunded and limited in what they could do. And as this threat grew all through the 90s and the 2000s, you had networks in Belgium involved in Al-Qaeda cases and other activity in other countries, but there weren't attacks in Belgium. So there was just kind of this, you know, this governmental dysfunction as far as building up the security forces. And when the ISIS threat exploded, the Syria jihad exploded in 2012, Belgium was the country that sent the most jihadis proportionally to Syria, and the government has had in the past couple of years to try and beef up its forces and catch up. But has just been behind the curve, and that's why the Paris attacks were really staged and largely driven by people from Belgium.
We're seeing some of the footage from those terror attacks in Paris. So then connect the dots for us. Why, out of all the countries in Europe, did the terrorists that hatched their plans in Belgium decide to target Paris?
Well, it was partly because, you know, some of the key people were from there, and the way it works with ISIS, they leave their foreign fighters a lot of autonomy, so people tend to attack the country they know best. But obviously, the idea is you take advantage of the fact that Europe has open borders for just about everything, travel and commerce and tourism, but the borders still impede police and intelligence services, so they set up in Belgium where they feel that they can operate better and the security forces are weaker to attack in the major capital, the major target that is Paris, with French accomplices who were from France and knew the territory well.
I just want to point out to our viewers, they're seeing footage from the Charlie Hebdo attacks. Those attacks are traced back to terrorists that had affiliations with Al-Qaeda. Then we have the other Paris attacks, and those terrorists have more affiliations with ISIS. And this is something that you address in the piece. I want to just play a little bit of sound regarding the Charlie Hebdo attacks and the person, one of the people at the center of the attack, the Kouachi brothers, and we're going to talk a little bit about how they were known entities, Sebastian, but let's just go ahead and play a little sound.
In 2008, Kouachi was convicted of recruiting fighters to go to Iraq and attempting to join Al-Qaeda. His sentence was 3 years, with 18 months suspended. Having already spent 20 months in prison awaiting his trial, Kouachi left court a free man.
From the moment they stepped out of prison, they left with an even greater hatred towards France than before. We only increased their wish for revenge and their determination to hurt us.
Why did that happen, Sebastian? Why weren't they prosecuted for more? Why weren't they held in prison more? And then why weren't they monitored more?
You know, it's a sad paradox because France is some of the best, toughest, knowledgeable security forces there are on Islamic terrorism, and they're good at identifying these people and locking them up, as happened in this case. But you know, the three main players in the Charlie Hebdo attacks were all people, as you say, who had been convicted of crimes for fighting in Iraq with Al-Qaeda, for a plot, for recruiting for Al-Qaeda, that in the United States they would have gotten 15 years minimum. What happens in France is that the courts are overcrowded, so if you're charged with terrorist conspiracies, a crime where you didn't actually, you know, somebody wasn't killed, the maximum sentence is 10 years, and people end up serving less than that. No one in this group, there was a bigger group of the people who ended up doing Charlie Hebdo, got more than 7 years. So it's very frustrating for the police and intelligence officers because they find that in this attack they're dealing with people who were known but who got back out, and because there was such after the Syrian jihad really picked up steam, there were so many people to watch going off to Syria. These Al-Qaeda guys who they were monitoring didn't seem as active, and at some point they decide they have to shift resources to what seems to be the more urgent threat, which is ISIS, and sure enough these guys attacked Charlie Hebdo.
That was one of the most remarkable parts of your piece. You see the decision that law enforcement had to make. We know these guys are Al-Qaeda, but we have to watch the guys that are the ISIS ones now, and they had to make a choice. And the individual that we saw interviewed, the chief anti-terror magistrate in France, said that the fatal flaw is weak border control, and that they were overwhelmed. They still don't have the means to watch their borders. And this is particularly important to us because of the visa waiver program we have with the EU and easy travel between our countries. So what is being done, Sebastian, to watch who's coming in and out and who can be dangerous?
Well, the way Europe works is because it has open internal borders, the external international borders become key to the security of all of Europe. The problem is that, you know, these are individual countries all working together, and so the border capabilities vary widely. They're very strong and tough in some places like the UK, comparable to the US, but much weaker in a place like Greece, which, as you know, is the place where a lot of the people who went to Syria and came back to do these attacks went through. Some of them who were wanted, you know, actually had arrest warrants on them or were on watch lists. So the problem is the lack of coordination, the lack of the European Union sitting down and saying we need to have uniform, tough border policies with databases and screening, and they are starting to do that. The European Union, for example, the Parliament, after 7 years of rejecting security chiefs who were pushing for airline screening like we do in the U.S., where the authorities have several days advance to screen passengers and look for connections. That was just approved. It will go to an effect in a couple of years, but it's still very difficult because these individual countries have to work together as a 28-member European Union to fix things like borders, and that just takes time, and it's a bureaucracy. And it was really, this problem became very clear when they were overwhelmed by the sheer number of people coming from ISIS and from Syria.
And just hearing you talk about the timeline, that it'll be ready in a couple of years, you know, and what happens between now and then. Sebastian, I'm going to have to run, but just really quick, what do you think is the single biggest lesson you learned from your reporting?
I think, you know, that it's amazing how structural problems, people can be aware about them and talking about them and proposing laws to change them, but it takes tragic terror attacks to really push action. Not unlike happened with us in after 9/11. I think that's the experience that Europe is going through now, having known what the problems were, but not, unfortunately, starting